George stepped onto the pale, turquoise path that wound through the center of the gleaming alien city, tugging lightly at the strap of his research satchel. Overhead, two suns cast angled rays across the sky, tinting the marble-like structures in amber and amethyst hues. He had traveled far from Earth on behalf of his university's interplanetary cultural research program. The civilization here, called the Razoran, was renowned for its strict social hierarchy and fierce warrior ethos. Already, George sensed an undercurrent of tension whenever he passed beneath their towering spires of glassy stone. He was determined to document every aspect of Razoran life, their architecture, their language, and their unspoken customs. Little did he know that his greatest discovery was waiting just a few steps further along that polished road. His first encounters with the Razoran had gone smoothly enough. They were polite yet formal, curious but guarded. Often they wore intricately sculpted armor-like garments that accentuated their lithe physiques. Their skin came in subtle shades of green or blue, and some had metallic tattoos winding along their arms. One of them stood out to him even in that first welcome ceremony, a tall woman with luminous jade skin and hair of frosted silver. The way she carried herself suggested not just discipline, but a regal lineage that demanded respect. When he had tried to approach her after the formal welcome, she vanished into a crowd of dignitaries and other Razoran delegates, leaving behind only an impression of her poise and haunting golden eyes. A few days into his stay, the Razoran Council assigned him an official escort and guide, someone who would ensure that he didn't accidentally violate any Razoran customs. To his surprise, it was the same woman, Rhianna, the council said, a warrior of esteemed background. George greeted her with a slight bow when she appeared outside his temporary quarters. She stared at him with an inscrutable gaze, arms folded neatly behind her back, a polished metal band across her forehead. At first, their interactions were practical. She showed him the major districts of the city, the gardens carved into the cliffside, and the shimmering ponds formed by unique, mineral-rich waters. She answered his questions minimally, as if reluctant to reveal too much about her people's deeper ways. Yet George noticed something in her careful stance. Whenever they reached a new site, a bizarre alien sculpture, or an archive of Razoran text, she would stand near him, watch his reactions, and keep her expression as controlled as ever. Beneath that composure, there was a small spark of curiosity in her eyes. He sensed that she wanted to know what a human researcher thought about her world, maybe even about her. But because she was a warrior, or perhaps because of deeper traditions, Rhianna didn't let her composure falter. The Razoran were rumored to be extremely disciplined, rarely revealing personal emotions. Still, George felt the presence of an unspoken tension whenever he caught her gaze lingering on him longer than usual. One late afternoon, as they walked together across a wide courtyard paved in azure stone, George decided to break from his usual measured approach. He paused under a tall archway, noticing the carved symbols etched along the pillars. Razoran glyphs, presumably. Sunlight refracted through the crystalline spires overhead, dancing off Rhianna's hair and illuminating the faint silver lines trailing across her brow. He felt an overwhelming sense of fascination and admiration. She was unlike anyone he had ever met, human or otherwise. And in a moment of spontaneous honesty, he told her, "You look beautiful in this light." Rhianna's reaction was swift and startling. Her sharp inhale echoed in the stillness between them, and her eyes widened in raw astonishment. She stood utterly motionless for a few heartbeats. George wondered if he had made an unforgivable faux pas in Razoran etiquette. He quickly tried to clarify, to apologize if needed, but he couldn't even string together a coherent sentence. She recovered almost instantly, resuming her stoic expression, yet he glimpsed a flicker of something, shock, wonder, or maybe alarm, beneath her polished surface. Without a word, Rhianna turned and walked away, leaving George perplexed and troubled. Had he inadvertently offended her? Why had a single compliment provoked such an intense response? The next day, Rhianna did not appear for the planned city tour. Instead, another Razoran guide named Sai greeted George, explaining that Rihanna was occupied with council duties. George was disappointed, yet he recognized he might have overstepped a boundary and that this was the council's reaction. Sai led him through various historical landmarks, meticulously noting each inscription for George's research. Although Sai was courteous, the energy felt different, more formal, more distanced. George found himself missing Rihanna's presence, missing her near-silent yet intense manner. On the following evening, after George returned to his assigned quarters, a room in an alien guest house with crystal windows that gave a panoramic view of the cityscape, he heard a familiar, measured knock at his door. He opened it to see Rihanna standing there, illuminated by the soft glow of the twin moons behind her. She wore a form-fitted bodysuit of deep bronze and silver plating around her shoulders, reminiscent of her warrior caste. He half expected her to scold him or inform him that his time in the city was over. Instead, she quietly stepped inside, waited until the door shut behind her, and said, "You called me beautiful." George let out a tense breath, trying to interpret her tone. "I did," he admitted, speaking gently. "I'm sorry if that was out of line." Humans use that word too well. It can mean many things. She regarded him for a long moment, arms at her sides, fists slightly clenched. "In Razoran speech," she began, her voice low, "there is no equivalent to your word beautiful that is offered so casually. It suggests a recognition of someone's worth that goes beyond mere appearance." George's heart fluttered. He tried to reassure her. It was a spontaneous, honest compliment. "I meant no disrespect." She stared at him, and in that pause he sensed conflicting emotions swirling behind her golden eyes. Finally, she let out a barely audible sigh. "Razoran tradition teaches us to guard certain declarations," she said. "We don't call someone beautiful unless we are prepared to stake a claim or imply a binding closeness." George's cheeks fell hot at the notion that, in her society, he had essentially made a statement beyond simple admiration. Yet he also sensed that some part of her might be drawn to that directness. "If I've broken a rule, please tell me," he said softly. "I don't wish to cause you trouble." She shook her head. "It is not a matter of rules alone," she murmured. "It's a matter of what this means. I have not heard this word from one of my own people, let alone an outsider. Yet your manner, your curiosity about our culture, it compels me to learn more. Our council will not understand such an exchange." She hesitated, as though on the verge of saying more. Instead, she turned abruptly and left. This time, George didn't stop her. He could only watch as her silhouette vanished into the corridor, his heart pounding with a confusing mix of attraction, apprehension, and fascination. Over the following week, Rihanna resumed guiding him, but their dynamic had changed. Each conversation was laced with an undercurrent of tension. He noticed how she sometimes glanced at him when she thought he wasn't looking, how her shoulders would relax whenever they talked quietly in a secluded corner of some ancient monument. Yet in public, she maintained an almost icy composure. George, for his part, found himself increasingly aware of every subtle gesture she made, her slightest smile, the way she brushed a stray wisp of silver hair behind her ear. The deeper he ventured into Razor knowledge, the more he also realized how rigid their social framework was. Warriors were not meant to display vulnerability or attachments. To do so would be seen as a sign of weakness. In between site visits, George wrote lengthy notes on his data tablet, describing Razoran artifacts, the geometry of their architectural wonders, and the stoic beauty of their ceremonies. Yet a separate section of his journal became dedicated entirely to Rihanna, his impressions of her subtle vulnerabilities, her layers of guarded strength. Every night, he reread those observations with a wistful sense that he was documenting something far more delicate and dangerous than he'd anticipated. When Rihanna next brought him to a grand temple perched atop shimmering cliffs, they watched acolytes perform a Razoran ceremonial dance, swirling metallic ribbons through the air. The temple was crowded, the audience rapt. As the ceremony ended, Rihanna gestured for George to follow her away from the main hall, down a corridor lined with luminous sculptures. I want to show you something, she said softly. She led him to a recessed alcove, where a small mural depicted an ancient Razoran myth. According to Rihanna, the painting told of two individuals from rival clans who fell in love and thereby united the clans, an event of great significance in Razoran history. This story, Rihanna explained, her tone hushed, reminds me of certain parallels. George felt his heart leap. Because of us? She turned away, scanning the corridor to ensure they were alone. I'm not prepared to say, but it is relevant, I think. Their eyes met in the soft glow. He saw a flicker of longing in her expression. For a moment, he considered telling her how often he thought about her, how her presence captivated him more than the wonders of her planet. Yet behind her gaze, he saw fear, too. Fear of being caught, fear of what it might mean for her if she admitted such closeness to a human. Finally, she reached out and gently brushed her fingertips against his forearm. The contact was minimal, but it felt electrifying. Then she withdrew her hand, stepping back into the corridor before anyone could see. By the time they returned to the city streets, the usual bustle had quieted into the hush of evening. Rihanna parted ways with him near the entrance to his guest house, where she paused. Be careful in the coming days, she warned. The council grows uneasy with your presence. He nodded, touched by her concern. Are you in trouble because of me? She hesitated, then answered, perhaps. But I choose my path. Without waiting for him to respond, she vanished into the night. George could only stand there, mind racing with 100 questions. What exactly was she risking? And was he truly worth it? When word reached him that Rihanna had been summoned by the council for private discussions, George felt a knot tighten in his stomach. He tried to request an audience with the council, thinking he could vouch for her, but was politely turned away. The next 2 days passed in agonizing uncertainty. On the third night, as George was reviewing data in his quarters, he heard an urgent knock. He opened the door to see Rihanna, looking exhausted, her shoulders slumped in a way he'd never witnessed before. She shut the door behind her with a trembling hand. Without ceremony, she said in a hushed tone, the council demanded I distance myself from you. They are concerned that your perspective is affecting me. I refused. That means I have to give up something dear. George felt a pang of guilt. I never wanted you to sacrifice anything. You have your place here, your role as a warrior. You're respected. She cut him off with a slight shake of her head. I always believed duty was my only purpose. Now I am not so sure. She gave a soft laugh devoid of humor. I do not understand how a single word, beautiful, could unravel so much, yet here we stand. A tense silence stretched between them. Slowly, George reached for her hand, and this time she let him hold it. Let me fight for you, he offered, voice thick with emotion. No, she said, pressing her palm against his chest. Your presence itself is cause enough. I must decide if I will follow the council's decree or choose another path. He could scarcely breathe as she leaned close, her forehead nearly touching his. He felt the heat of her skin, the soft catch of her breath. Then, as if steeling herself, Rihanna stepped away. I will speak to them once more, she murmured. If we cannot find compromise, I must leave the city entirely. Will you come with me? Her question made his chest tighten. Earth was far behind him, his mission was ongoing, but the thought of staying here without her seemed impossible. Yes, he answered in a near whisper. I'll go wherever you need to go. The next morning, Rihanna appeared before the council. George wasn't allowed in, but rumors spread swiftly. The council was deeply troubled by her emotional entanglement with a human. Some believed it would compromise her warrior discipline. Some worried about the symbolic implications that a revered Razoran fighter had grown close to an outsider. By midday, George heard that Rihanna had publicly declared she would not sever ties with him. Word also drifted that if she persisted, she might face exile or, at best, indefinite suspension of her warrior status. Later that afternoon, while George anxiously roamed the city outskirts, Rihanna found him. She arrived without wearing her usual metallic plating, clad instead in a simple cloth tunic that left her more vulnerable. She had left her rank behind. They have told me I must choose, she began, her voice calmer than he expected. My place in the city forsworn if I remain with you. He swallowed. Rihanna, I'm sorry. She offered him a faint, resolute smile. If it is between losing my rank or losing what I have begun to feel, I have made my choice. She explained that she had been stripped of her warrior privileges, that she was effectively an outcast unless she returned to the council with proof she had cut ties with him. A flush of rage filled George at the heavy-handedness of it all. Yet he knew that anger could accomplish little right now. Rihanna had already taken an irreversible step. They decided to remain in a small inn by the outskirts that night, away from the prying eyes of the city. Rihanna was silent and distant. George wondered if she regretted her decision. After a meager meal, they sat outside the inn, watching the twin moons rise in unison. The sky shimmered with constellations unknown to Earth. Finally, Rihanna spoke. I've always been taught that any emotional bond can be exploited by one's enemies. Our people's code insists we remain vigilant, unburdened by deep attachments. But I'm beginning to suspect that what the code calls a weakness can be our greatest source of strength. George gently placed his hand over hers. Maybe your culture never had a chance to explore that possibility. Maybe it took a stranger's perspective to show a different path. She studied him with a soft, unguarded expression. Yes, she said simply, maybe. After a moment, she added, tomorrow, we can't stay here. There will be watchers. The council might send enforcers to make me return, or punish me for my refusal to obey. Her voice shook slightly. I do not want you to be harmed in any way. At dawn, they left the inn quietly. Under the pale glow of the rising suns, they walked along a narrow ridge leading to a dusty plateau. A rumor had reached Rihanna about a settlement nestled beyond the city's domain, a haven for those who sought freedom from the council's rules. George was ready to accompany her, even though it meant abandoning his official research mission. But in truth, his heart soared. Whatever came next, he knew he wanted to be with her. They hadn't gone far before two Razoran warriors confronted them, blocking their path. Clad in black armor, faces obscured by tinted visors, they spoke in clipped, formal commands. Rihanna must return to the city, and George would be escorted to a quarantined research facility. Rihanna stiffened. George felt a pulse of fear, but also an odd sense of determination. He'd never seen Rihanna in full warrior mode, not directed at him, but at an enemy. She shifted her stance, a lethal stillness radiating from her. The two warriors approached with confidence, possibly underestimating her. That was a mistake. In a flash, Rihanna lashed out, twisting one warrior's arm behind his back with a swift motion. The crack of plating reverberated in the dusty air as she knocked him off balance. The second warrior lunged for her with an electrified staff. George grabbed a handful of stones from the ground, flinging them at the warrior's visor, hoping to distract. It worked for a half-second, long enough for Rihanna to deliver a precise blow that sent the staff clattering away. She pressed a knee to the warrior's chest, her hand hovering as if about to strike a killing blow. But she hesitated, inhaling raggedly, and then released him. Tell the council, she said, voice tight. I am done. If they pursue me further, I will not be so merciful. With that, she motioned for George to follow her, and they slipped away into the rugged terrain. The confrontation left George shaken. For the first time, he understood just how powerful she was when cornered, how dangerous it was for her to defy the strict codes of her society. They traversed dusty trails until they reached a patch of fertile ground fed by a hidden spring. There, exhausted, they found temporary shelter in an abandoned stone structure, perhaps once used by travelers. The roof was partially collapsed, but it provided enough cover to rest and regroup. That night, George lit a small fire from local brush. Orange embers danced against the black sky. Rihanna sat across from him, her knees drawn close, her posture exuding tension. He studied her face. Do you regret it? He asked softly. Leaving your warrior caste, your home, all you've known? She gazed at the flickering flames. I regret only that my people see this as betrayal instead of possibility. Yet if I had remained, I would live half a life, forever wondering about these feelings you awakened in me." She reached out and placed a hand against his cheek, her skin warm despite the night air. "You taught me that beautiful can mean more than superficial appearance. It can mean a rare closeness, a recognition of another's essence. Perhaps I too see you that way, George." In the gentle crackle of the fire, they shared their first true embrace without fear of watchers or council oversight. She was stronger than him in raw physical terms, yet her touch trembled with a vulnerable tenderness. It felt like a vow, something neither had consciously planned, but which sealed them together. When they finally pulled apart, Rihanna's eyes glistened in the firelight. "We must continue onward tomorrow," she said. "The place I've heard of is beyond these hills, another day's journey. After that, we will see." As dawn broke, they continued along a winding path that led through canyons of shimmering stone, the mineral content reflecting the rising sunlight in vibrant blues and greens. George joked quietly that someone from Earth's gemstone industry would go wild in a place like this. Rihanna simply nodded, her mind elsewhere, scanning the horizon for any sign of pursuit. By midday, the heat grew intense. They halted under a crag to sip water from a canteen. During this pause, Rihanna studied George, noticing how exhaustion lined his features. "We can rest here," she proposed, "but not for too long." They pressed onward, and in the late afternoon, they reached a vantage point overlooking a broad valley. There, at the far side, lay a cluster of low-built structures with mismatched designs. Some looked Razorian in style, some bore hallmarks of entirely different alien architectures, and a few seemed crudely put together with scraps. Smoke curled from a few chimneys. "That must be it," Rihanna said softly. "A refuge for exiles, for travelers who don't belong to any official city or council." They descended carefully. As they approached the settlement, George caught sight of a tall figure with bluish skin waving for them to stop. He recognized the broad features of a different race he had read about in his research, a Saren, perhaps. The man's deep-set eyes flicked over Rihanna's attire, then to George's dusty clothes, and he offered a guarded greeting in halting Razorian. Rihanna explained succinctly that they were seeking a place to stay. The Saren studied them a moment longer, then gestured for them to follow. They found themselves inside a communal area, half open to the desert air, where a handful of other exiles milled about. Some were Razorian, but clearly out of favor. George recognized the look in their eyes. Displaced, uncertain, no longer under the Council's protection. Others belonged to entirely different species, presumably also outcasts or wanderers. A woman with marbled skin approached, offering them a place to sleep in a small hut near the settlement's edge. The structure was crude, but serviceable. Inside were 2 worn mats, a battered table, and minimal supplies. It would be their home for now. Though Rihanna remained quiet, George sensed her relief. Here, no council guards would show up demanding her return. The settlement was out of the council's jurisdiction, a lawless pocket where exiles could carve out a semblance of peace. That night, they ate simple rations and tried to plan their next steps. Rihanna toyed with a piece of her old armor, absently tracing a scratch on its surface. "I'm no longer a warrior," she said softly, "but I don't know what I am now. I gave up everything for a human who called me beautiful." There was no bitterness in her tone, just a quiet puzzlement at the strangeness of fate. George wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "You're Rihanna," he replied gently, "and that's enough for me." In the following days, they found a wary acceptance among the settlement's residents. George used his background in research and engineering to help repair a communications device that had long been broken. The device allowed the settlement to detect approaching vessels or glean signals from distant regions. Meanwhile, Rihanna contributed her formidable training in a less martial form. She practiced defensive drills with some of the younger exiles who feared bandits or roving beasts in the canyons. Although it pained her to wear her partial armor, since it reminded her of all she lost, she found a certain freedom in teaching without a strict code overshadowing her. Despite the cautious calm, both Rihanna and George remained on alert. They feared the council might dispatch a more formidable squad to drag her back. But the days passed without incident. They settled into a gentle routine. George documented everything about the settlement: the patchwork of cultures, the improvised architecture, the sense of fragile community. In the evenings, the two of them took walks under the vivid starlight. They would find a secluded spot, sit beneath the alien constellations, and talk about their childhoods, their hopes, and the improbable bond that had formed between them. Every so often, Rihanna would laugh softly, as though marveling at how drastically her life had changed since the day she guided a human researcher through her glorious city. Yet a deeper shift was on the horizon. After a few weeks in the settlement, George started to notice changes in Rihanna. At first, he assumed it was merely the result of stress. She would pace around the small hut at night, apparently unsettled by an unseen burden. But she soon began confiding that something felt different about her body. She had more strength surges than usual, her senses were sharpening, and her emotions became more intense. It was on a quiet afternoon that she confided in him. "George, there's a possibility that I'm carrying a child." He was stunned. The concept of interspecies conception between a Razoran and a human had never been discussed in his research. "Is that even possible?" he managed. She lowered her gaze. "We do not have records of such a union. But I know my body, and I sense something is growing, changing within me." A swirl of awe, fear, and joy overtook him. If indeed there was life growing inside her, they had created something truly new, an unprecedented bridge between their peoples. But the stakes soared higher. He already worried for her safety, and now he had to worry for the well-being of their child, especially if the council discovered it. They agreed to keep it secret from the other exiles for the time being. Rihanna needed time to be sure and to adapt to the experience. George scavenged for medical instruments or scanning devices among the settlement stored technology, but the best he could find was a rudimentary diagnostic tool that confirmed elevated metabolic activity in Rihanna's physiology. Not definitive proof, but enough to indicate she might indeed be pregnant. That night, lying awake next to her, George felt the significance of the path they had chosen. They were forging a future that had no precedent, a leap of faith and love. He whispered quiet reassurances to her in the darkness. Her hand found his, and she squeezed it, saying nothing. She didn't need to. The settlement soon picked up rumors. Another Razor in exile overheard George asking about prenatal care. Word spread that Rihanna might be carrying a child. Whispers circulated that it was not purely Razoran, sparking curiosity and apprehension among those who still had ties to the city. George noticed how some of them looked at him with a mixture of awe and suspicion, like he had crossed a forbidden boundary. Rihanna did her best to stand tall, but George saw her exhaustion creeping in. The physical changes taxed her. At times, she napped during the day, her usually keen reflexes dulled. Some nights, she would jolt awake, her body trembling with unexplained surges of energy. George rubbed her back through each episode, murmuring comfort until she relaxed. The morning everything changed, George had just stepped outside to gather supplies from a passing trader. He heard a commotion near the settlement's perimeter. A group of Razoran warriors, outfitted in advanced combat gear, stood at the boundary. They demanded to speak with Rihanna. The exiles froze, uncertain whether to drive these intruders away or allow them inside. The leader of the squad, a tall figure with silver insignias across his chest, announced that Rihanna was to be taken into custody for violating the highest code of the warrior caste. They knew about the pregnancy. Perhaps they believed it an aberration or a threat. George hurried back to the hut, fear clawing at his chest, and found Rihanna standing in the doorway, eyes narrowed. He tried to speak, but she silenced him with a gentle hand on his arm. She stepped forward, facing the approaching warriors. "If you have come to harm us, know that I will protect my family." The lead warrior's expression hardened. "You dishonor yourself and all Razoran by carrying this abomination. Surrender or face the consequences." A hush fell across the settlement. George could hear his own heartbeat pounding in his ears. Was there a way to negotiate? But Rihanna's stance told him negotiations were futile. Her eyes flared gold in the daylight, raw determination shining through. "No," she declared. "I do not acknowledge your authority anymore." Within seconds, the confrontation turned violent. One warrior lunged forward, brandishing a crackling energy blade. Rihanna sidestepped, pivoted with lethal grace, and slammed her heel into the attacker's side, sending him reeling. Two more lunged. George scrambled behind an overturned cart, searching for anything to help. One of the exiles tossed him a low-charge pulse rifle. He fired a warning shot near the feet of a warrior who was about to flank Rihanna. The shot caused the warrior to jump back, buying her an extra second. She delivered a swift strike to disarm him. But the lead warrior advanced, pressing a device on his gauntlet that emitted a jarring sonic pulse aimed at Rihanna. She staggered, nearly falling to one knee as the sonic waves radiated over her. George sprang from cover, ignoring the risk. He tackled the lead warrior from behind, wrestling for control of the device. The warrior was much stronger, flipping George onto his back. George felt a searing ache in his shoulder. Rihanna, though dazed, seized the opportunity to smash the device with her fist, sparks flying. She pressed an elbow against the warrior's throat, her teeth bared. "No more," she hissed. Then, glancing at the others, she raised her voice. "Leave now, or I will end this without mercy." One of the exiles joined her, brandishing a makeshift spear, while others formed a small protective circle around Rihanna and George. Realizing they were outnumbered and that the settlement would not allow them to take her easily, the Razoran warriors retreated, but not without delivering a warning. The leader spat, "We will not forget this betrayal. The council will see you brought to justice." Then they were gone. George lay sprawled on the dusty ground, gasping for air, while Rihanna knelt beside him. Concern clouded her eyes, overshadowing her earlier fury. Gently, she ran her hand over his injured shoulder, checking for breaks. "You're reckless," she whispered, though her tone held relief. He managed a weak grin. "I'm not letting them hurt you or our child." They received help from the exiles to tend to their wounds. The Saruman who had greeted them initially approached. "Your conflict is yours," he said, "but we do not turn away those threatened by the council. Stay here, or if you must, flee further. We will assist as we can." Grateful though they were, Rihanna and George realized that remaining in the settlement put everyone at risk. The next day, they asked the local inhabitants about any place beyond the council's extended reach. Rumors pointed to an even more remote region, a sanctuary rumored to be governed by no single race. It would be a difficult journey, but they had few options. They spent one last night at the settlement, uncertain whether to push Rihanna to travel in her condition. Yet she insisted, "I will not let them tear this child away from me. If we stay, the council might strike again with greater force." So they prepared an old transport rover, donated by an exiled mechanic who claimed it still had life left in it. Early the next morning, with supplies strapped to the back, they set out for lands unknown. George handled the rover's controls while Rihanna rested in the passenger seat. The vehicle rumbled across desert flats and over ridges of broken rock. Occasionally, Rihanna dozed, her hand unconsciously cradling her abdomen. Each time George glanced at her, he was flooded with a mix of awe and protective resolve. They encountered storms of shimmering sand that forced them to take shelter behind outcroppings. They navigated around jagged canyons using half-faded maps gleaned from the settlement's battered data terminal. At night, they camped under the stars, the rover's lights casting gentle halos against the alien rocks. Along the way, Rihanna confided more about Razoran beliefs regarding lineage and tradition. "We have no concept of a child born between two different species," she admitted. "Even within our own race, we rarely break from family lines. The council may see our child as a threat to the purity of the warrior caste. They fear anything unpredictable." George listened, occasionally offering an Earth analogy of how, in human history, children of mixed heritage sometimes faced prejudice or sometimes became harbingers of unity. He hoped that theirs could be a symbol of hope rather than division. Days blurred into a challenging, yet strangely fulfilling routine. Rihanna's pregnancy symptoms evolved. Her strength flared unpredictably, and she sometimes complained of intense headaches. George did his best to comfort her, while also navigating the harsh terrain. Finally, after a particularly grueling trek across a salt-cracked basin where the rover nearly broke down, they sighted signs of vegetation, a stretch of green along the horizon. Pushing onward, they discovered a hidden valley with an outpost that looked somewhat more advanced than the settlement they had left. A tall scanning tower loomed overhead, a beacon of technology. As they approached, individuals of various species emerged, cautious but not immediately hostile. One stepped forward, a broad-shouldered being with violet skin and symmetrical ridges along his cheeks. In fluent Razoran, he asked them to state their names and intentions. Rihanna introduced them simply, an exiled Razoran warrior and a human researcher seeking refuge from the council. The violet-skinned man studied them closely, gaze lingering on Rihanna's abdomen as though he sensed the significance. Then, in a surprisingly gentle tone, he said, "We have many exiles and seekers here. You are welcome to rest if you bring no violence." Rihanna and George exchanged a relieved glance. This might be the sanctuary they had heard about. They were shown into a network of low buildings that circled around a sunken garden, alive with alien flora. Each building was made from sturdy composite materials, some clearly salvaged from crashed starships or repurposed from advanced designs. The vibe was not lawless, but communal. Everyone contributed. They found an empty unit that would serve as a private dwelling. Clean water, food rations, even basic medical scanners were available. For the first time in weeks, they could imagine settling somewhere without constant fear. George immediately sought out medical equipment that might be able to confirm Rihanna's pregnancy beyond doubt and monitor her health. After some bartering and explaining, a local medic of an amphibious species agreed to help. The scan results showed an elevated fetal reading, partial Razoran genetic markers, partial human. Rihanna was indeed pregnant with a hybrid child, the very first of its kind. Although the medic was discreet and non-judgmental, he offered them a warning that carrying such a child to term could present unknown complications. Despite the uncertainties, Rihanna wore an expression of fierce resolve. "I will protect this child," she declared softly, her hand pressed over her stomach. George, standing beside her, wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "So will I," he promised. The days in that hidden outpost turned into weeks. They began forging relationships with the community. George assisted in the scanning tower operations, using his technical background to upgrade some of the calibration software. Rihanna, though more cautious about physical exertion, found ways to help train some volunteers in defensive maneuvers. Over time, she confided to George that, despite being exiled, she felt more freedom here than she ever had in the city. No more living under the council's rigid codes. Perhaps, she mused, she had discovered who she truly was, someone stronger and kinder than the unyielding warrior she was groomed to be. Their child became the gentle pivot of their hopes and fears. Rihanna's belly grew slowly, her posture adjusting, her senses more attuned. Even so, she insisted on maintaining moderate training. George often tried to dissuade her from doing anything too strenuous, but she would brush him off with a calm confidence. He recognized that warrior spirit was ingrained deep within her. As if in compromise, she learned earth-based breathing exercises that he taught her, gleaned from ancient yoga techniques he had tried in his youth. She seemed to find them surprisingly helpful. There were nights when George awoke to find Rihanna staring at the wide glass window, beyond which the twin moons floated. He would approach her, slip an arm around her waist, and whisper, "What do you see?" She would sometimes talk about her old city, the shimmering towers, the place that had once been her entire world. Other times, she talked about the future, the child learning to walk in the outpost's courtyard, the possibility of bridging human and Razoran cultures, and, inevitably, the risk that the council might send more troops. But the outpost was better protected and better armed than the settlement they left, giving them a measure of reassurance. Indeed, a few traveling merchants reported that the council had grown preoccupied with internal strife. Some warrior clans demanded more autonomy. Others questioned the council's decisions regarding exiles. Rumors circulated that Rihanna's departure had sown seeds of doubt among younger warriors. The notion that a respected fighter would leave everything for an alien love might have inspired quiet factions to question the old codes. George felt an odd glimmer of hope. Perhaps, in time, the council's iron hold would weaken, allowing acceptance for people like him and Rihanna. Perhaps. As Rihanna's pregnancy neared its final stretch, the local medic advised rest and caution. George was a constant presence, helping her with any daily chores. She teased him that a human researcher had become her personal caretaker, but he could see the gratitude in her eyes. For both of them, those final weeks felt like a slow exhale after so many months of tension. One evening, under soft lamplight, Rihanna placed George's hand on her belly. "Feel that," she whispered. A gentle, fluttering movement pressed against his palm. Emotion overwhelmed him. "Yes," he breathed. "That's our child." Rihanna's gaze shimmered with tears she refused to shed. "I never dreamed such a thing was possible for me. Someone with my training, my background. But you changed everything." When the child decided to arrive, it happened under the glow of the smaller moon rising. Rihanna's contractions began abruptly one night, and George, in a haze of excitement and worry, rushed to gather the medic and any volunteers who had knowledge of midwifery or childbearing. A few hours of intensity followed. Rihanna, though exhausted, harnessed her fierce discipline to navigate each wave of pain. The outpost's small clinic was lit by flickering overhead lights, and George never left her side. He cradled her hand, occasionally pressing a cool cloth to her forehead. She let out measured breaths, eyes focused on some unseen point. At the peak of the ordeal, her entire body shook with the effort to bring this new life into the world. And then, in one final, shuddering gasp, the child's cry filled the room, soft but unmistakably alive. The medics and volunteers exchanged stunned looks. George felt tears slip down his cheeks. Rihanna sat propped on pillows, her expression one of raw disbelief and profound relief. The medic carefully placed a small bundle in her arms. Their baby's skin was mostly a pale green, but with faint human undertones. Tiny eyelids fluttered, opening to reveal eyes that glinted gold with small flecks of brown. The child's hair, if it could be called that, was a soft silver fuzz. Rihanna gazed at him in silent wonder, tears pooling at the corners of her eyes. Then she turned to George, placing the baby in his trembling arms. For a moment, George could barely breathe. This little being was more than any scientific curiosity or cultural phenomenon. It was their child, the result of love that had defied the boundaries of species and tradition. When he glanced at Rihanna, he saw an unspoken question in her eyes. "Are we truly safe here?" He answered with a tender smile, leaning down to kiss her forehead. Whatever threats lay beyond, they had each other. That bond, forged by choice, word, and vow, would be enough to face what came. Next, the following days were a joyous blur of caring for a newborn. Rihanna discovered a side of herself she never knew existed: motherhood. She handled every feed, every cry, with a calm diligence reminiscent of her warrior training, but infused now with warmth and affection. George aided her however he could, though he sometimes fumbled in comedic ways. The entire outpost seemed to celebrate the unusual birth, with different species offering small gifts or well wishes. News traveled quickly, though, and not all who heard would rejoice. They remained vigilant, but hope overshadowed their worries. Within the outpost, at least, the child was welcomed, treated as a sign that unity was possible. One day, standing at the large windows in their living quarters, George cradled the infant while Rihanna rested. He marveled at the child's delicate features, a seamless blend of alien and human traits. The tiny fingers curled around his own with surprising strength. George whispered a vow that no harm would come to this baby. He reflected on how everything had begun with a compliment that he had assumed was harmless. It had ignited an entire chain of events that brought them here to a new life and a new family. Though the road behind them was dangerous, and the path ahead might be unpredictable, he felt only gratitude and peace in that moment. Weeks passed, and the child grew steadily, stirring excitement among the outpost's residents. Rihanna, now more confident in her new role, sometimes teased George that their baby already showed hints of a warrior's spirit, protesting loudly whenever startled. Late one evening, George came across Rihanna seated by the window, the child asleep in her arms. Outside, the twin moons lit the valley. She glanced at George, gesturing for him to sit beside her. He slid close, putting an arm around her as she carefully shifted the baby so George could see the small, peaceful face. "I never imagined I would end up here," she whispered, eyes still fixed on the night sky. "My entire life was devoted to discipline, to fighting for my people. And then a human researcher told me I was beautiful. Everything I believed crumbled." She leaned her head on George's shoulder. "Sometimes, I still wonder if we'll be hunted. But if we are, I will face it again. For us." George felt emotion well in his throat. "We'll face it together. Always." The child stirred, releasing a tiny sigh. They sat in companionable silence, the hush of the outpost giving way to the soft rustle of wind beyond the walls. At times, George thought back to the shimmering city of the Razoran and wondered if perhaps, someday, they could walk there openly, their child seen not as an abomination, but as a beacon of possibility. Maybe they would never return. Maybe the council would maintain its rigid codes forever. But for now, he was content to rest in this corner of the universe, forging a life with the woman he loved and the new family they had created. There was beauty in that, simple, profound, transformative. One word had changed two lives, sparked a new one, and reshaped the destiny of at least 3 souls. All because he dared to say, "You look beautiful," to an alien warrior who had no concept of the word's casual use. Her response had left him stunned, indeed, and what followed truly was beyond anything he could have imagined. As the child grew, the outpost became a kind of home. George continued documenting everything. The small blossoming of Rihanna's maternal side, the child's physical milestones, the subtle ways that Razoran and human genes intermingled. Rihanna remained somewhat cautious, rarely revealing the full extent of her talents as a warrior, but she trained discreetly to keep herself fit. Occasionally, travelers from distant regions arrived, some bearing news that the Razoran Council had conflicts with younger warriors who questioned the old ways. A few whispered that Rihanna's name still carried weight in rumor, that a part of the population considered her an icon of freedom, someone who dared choose love over tradition. Though Rihanna listened to these rumors with a tight expression, she made no move to rejoin or challenge her people. She had found what she wanted, and it was here. Sometimes she and George talked about the possibility of returning once the child was older, maybe forging some sort of peaceful dialogue. Other times, they spoke of traveling to Earth, letting the child see humanity's domain. But such speculations remained distant. For now, it was enough to watch each sunrise reflect on the valley walls, to share meals with newfound friends, to watch their child's bright eyes roam curiously over the outpost's open plazas. In quieter moments, George recalled the night he first complimented Rihanna in the courtyard. If someone had told him then that he would soon be exiled alongside her, fighting off armed soldiers, and welcoming the birth of an interspecies child in a remote refuge, he would have dismissed it as impossible. Now, it was simply his reality, and a joy he never could have predicted. What started as a single word, beautiful, became the hinge upon which fate turned. And somehow, it led to the most precious gift he could imagine. Not all endings are final, and not all stories tidy. But George and Rihanna learned that courage was an ongoing choice. Day by day, they built a stronger bond, raising a child that personified the union of 2 worlds. For Rihanna, Each day was proof that vulnerability could be a source of strength, rather than the weakness her old training had warned her about. For George, each day was a testament to the wonder of discovery. He had come seeking knowledge and found something far richer. Thus, under the brilliance of twin suns, they lived and thrived. If the council came someday, Rhianna would be ready. If Earth beckoned, George would show her the oceans and forests of his planet. But for now, their future was exactly where they were, a hut nestled among exiles who had become friends, a place where different species learned to coexist, and a new family whose every breath defied ancient boundaries. In the hush of the evening, when the child slept peacefully and Rhianna rested against him, George let the magnitude of it all wash over him. It was, in a word, unbelievable, and yet here it was wondrously, beautifully real. A thin, turquoise glow shimmered across the curved hull of the USS Paladin as it drifted out of the orbital shipyards above Earth. Every reinforced panel of the battleship caught slivers of the distant sun, making the massive vessel gleam with a confidence that only humanity could project when it chose to do so. Aboard this flagship of the United Earth Defense Force, Colonel Thomas Tom Rook stood at the primary observation window, hands clasped behind his back. Lean, with cropped hair, turned silver at the temples from stress rather than age, he regarded the silent starscape through bright, watchful eyes. In the hush of that viewing deck, he remembered the promise his people had made years ago. When Earth had been on the brink of collapse, racked by a virulent, unknown pathogen, the Eldorians had come. These tall, silver-eyed aliens had arrived with advanced biotech and an altruistic core to their culture. They had saved millions. They had asked for nothing in return. But humanity was not prone to forgetting. And now the day had come to uphold that vow. Reports had already reached Earth that the Eldorian homeworld, Eldoria, was under attack by the Gorax, a warrior species known for the systematic conquest of smaller star nations. Even so, the Galactic Council hesitated. Some bureaucrats wanted to observe. Others fretted that coming to Eldoria's aid might unbalance the precarious alliances with competing star empires. But Colonel Rook knew the UEDF stance. They would not stand idle, not when they owed their Eldorian allies a debt they could never repay in full. As the final docking clamps released, the USS Paladin began to maneuver away from the station, and thousands of Earth-based personnel completed the final checks for departure. In the Paladin's war room, large holographic displays hovered above a circular command table, projecting star charts and sensor readouts. Officers and analysts, each in the crisp, dark blue UEDF uniform, passed data pads around or exchanged urgent murmurs. At the center of it all stood Colonel Rook, calm yet resolute, flanked by a handful of senior officers. "Sir, final readiness checks are complete," announced Major Regina Alvarez, her broad shoulders squared as though even calm moments demanded discipline. "All ships in the task force have confirmed they're ready for faster-than-light transit on your command." Rook nodded. "Set the course for Eldoria. We leave immediately." His voice, though quiet, carried a weight that commanded the room. "And let the council know that we will proceed regardless of their deliberations. We cannot afford to wait." He turned away from the table and made his way to a side room with reinforced glass walls, more subdued lighting, and a communications console. There, in holographic form, waited Ambassador Serani of Eldoria, a figure both graceful and pallid, with the faintest glow in her silver-white skin that betrayed her underlying bioluminescent biology. She had barely escaped the initial assault on her homeworld and now traveled aboard a humanitarian vessel that roamed the edges of the conflict zone. "Ambassador," Rook greeted, inclining his head in genuine respect. "We're about to depart Earth space. Confirm your position." Her expression was drawn with worry. "We're holding at the fringe of Eldorian territory. The Gorax blockade has spread to include the outer stations. I fear they'll soon complete their encirclement." Colonel Rook's jaw set. "We're coming. The entire UEDF expeditionary fleet is coming. USS Paladin, support cruisers, frigates, and half a dozen corvettes. Tell your people that we will break that blockade." She exhaled, relief evident. though her eyes still shimmered with well-contained dread. "Thank you, Colonel. You know our gratitude for what your race is doing, but time grows short. My people are suffering." He paused, forcing himself to rein in a spike of anger on Eldoria's behalf. "Humans always return a favor, Ambassador. We owe Eldoria far too much to watch you stand alone." He ended the call. Moments later, the entire UEDF fleet slipped into faster-than-light corridors, the swirling color of hyperspace engulfing them in shimmering waves. The stage was set. Humanity's vow would soon be tested on the fires of the battlefield. The transition from hyperspace to normal space above Eldoria's star was jarring and immediate. One moment, the sensors read swirling dimensional anomalies. The next, the entire fleet was ejected into real space with a slight jolt. Through the Paladin's main viewport, Rook could see the star's bright orb and, further in system, the faint shape of Eldoria itself. Surrounding that distant sphere were multiple objects in orbit, large enough to be stations or warships. The images, fuzzy at first, sharpened as the Paladin's sensor arrays refocused. Commander Vincent Lee, the Paladin's executive officer, stepped up behind Rook and pointed at a cluster of red icons on the holo display. "Those must be Gorak's warships. Some look like refitted carriers, probably with interceptors or assault shuttles. And there's a ring of orbital platforms, possibly fortified with point defense cannons." Rook took a breath. The Eldorians didn't mention that the Goraks had time to set up so much. The blockade must be well established. "Alvarez, send out scout drones. I need a clearer picture of their numbers and any hidden threat." Within minutes, small, stealthy drones soared ahead, scanning the territory. Their transmissions revealed lethal batteries of mass drivers, missile silos, and what might have been captured Eldorian satellites now reprogrammed to serve the invaders' cause. Only one Eldorian cruiser flickered on the sensors, half-crippled and hiding near a barren moon's shadow to avoid detection. There was no sign of the humanitarian vessel that Ambassador Serani occupied. Likely it, too, was lurking somewhere beyond sensor range. In the hangar bay of the Paladin, flight crews scrambled to prepare combat fighters and bombers. Belt-fed cannons clinked, fueling trucks scurried like insects, and the faint smell of ionized metal drifted through the corridors. Marines checked gear in the staging areas, tension pressing on every face. Over the ship's intercom, a calm but firm female voice gave unit assignments and operational codes. Colonel Rook stood at a railing overlooking the deck, watching the swirl of activity. He wanted to be out there with his troops, but his duty demanded he coordinate the entire campaign. On the floor below, he spotted a group of Eldorian volunteers, lithe, silver-eyed, with a slight shimmer to their complexions, conversing with a human squad. They wore minimal armor, apparently preferring the blend of advanced biotech suits. Watching them reminded Rook of the day Earth's horizon had turned black with the thunderheads of that ancient plague. The Eldorians had come, wearing the same suits, saving them. Yes, humans always return a favor. While the finishing touches of the battle plan unfolded, he received a message from Ambassador Serani. A hollow projection flickered. She looked shaken. "Colonel, Gorak's vessels have driven many Eldorian ships from orbit. We lost contact with the ground. My last transmission from the surface said the Goraks broke through the capital city's outer defenses. They're forcing scientists to yield up biotech secrets. Others are taken as hostages." It's bleak, his mouth pressed into a thin line. "Sit tight, Ambassador. We won't let it continue." The Goraks realized the sudden arrival of a formidable Earth fleet. Their communications burst across the subspace channels. An ultimatum demanded that the UEDF withdraw. The broadcast also included images of captive Eldorians locked in barbed energy fields. It was intimidation, meant to scare the humans into retreat. Instead, Rook took to the communications console. "This is Colonel Thomas Rook of the United Earth Defense Force. Your aggression against Eldoria will end today. Withdraw immediately or face the consequences." The Goraks retorted with threats and curses, turning to focus a portion of their blockade to aim directly at the Paladin. Rook ended the channel, letting the rumble of tension settle into the war room. He pointed to a three-dimensional battle map. Let them come. The Paladin can handle the brunt if it means clearing a corridor for the rest of the fleet. He turned to his staff. We will punch a hole in their blockade. Meanwhile, I want a covert infiltration force to land on Eldoria. We can't just fight from orbit. Major Alvarez, coordinate with Lieutenant Mariko Ito. Her infiltration teams excel at sabotage. We also have Eldorian officer Aaron Sol aboard. Pair them up. Their objective is to disable the Gorax ground-based power stations and rescue Eldorian leadership. Alvarez saluted. Yes, sir. I'll give the go-ahead immediately. Moments later, squads of Marines and Eldorian volunteers boarded stealth transports in a hangar. Aaron Sol, distinguished by the metallic shimmer on his forearms that indicated some form of biotech graft, offered a respectful bow to Lieutenant Ito. They hardly exchanged words, but the sense of urgency was mutual. Time was not their ally. Over Eldoria's horizon, Gorax warships began to reposition. The Paladin advanced first, flanked by a pair of UEDF cruisers. The Gorax responded with missile salvos and beams of charged plasma. In a vacuum of space, bright flashes erupted like silent fireworks. The Paladin's shields flared under repeated hits. Inside the warship, Colonel Rook barked orders over the shrill klaxons. Maintain formation. Transfer additional power to forward shields. Wait for them to concentrate fire, then release a wide dispersal of countermeasures. The Gorax had likely expected a timid approach. Instead, the Paladin soared forward, unleashing a volley of railgun bursts that tore through the unprepared flanks of the nearest enemy carrier. A chain of secondary explosions lit the darkness. Two Gorax interceptors spun away, reeling from the shock. At that moment, the infiltration team launched. Their stealth transports slipped past the chaos and descended into Eldoria's atmosphere. Fire glowed along the edges of their hulls as they punched through the upper stratosphere. The Gorax, busy with the intense orbital battle, barely noticed these small infiltration drops. Lieutenant Ito and Aaron Sol braced themselves inside the lead transport, which rattled from turbulence. A few of the Eldorian volunteers pressed their lips together in silent alarm at the harsh entry angle. Unaccustomed to Earth's brand of push through it, fix problems later. Ito checked the flight plan, glancing at Aaron Sol's stoic face. You know the route into the capital? She asked. He gave a curt nod. Yes. We built underground passageways decades ago, originally for emergency evacuations. If the Gorax haven't discovered them yet, we can slip in. Then let's hope they're still secret. They touched down in a mountainous region, concealed behind jagged cliffs and dense clusters of xenobiotic vegetation. Eldoria's terrain was starkly beautiful. Silver-leaf trees and turquoise streams sparkled under a violet sky. Half the infiltration team took a moment to admire it, reminded of the planet's famed aesthetic. But there was no time to dwell on scenic wonders. They swiftly unloaded gear and prepared for the trek to the tunnel entrance. Meanwhile, on the ground, countless Eldorians had either fled or been herded into makeshift detention sites. Captain Morix of the Gorax oversaw operations from a commandeered Eldorian fortress, a heavy structure with carved crystalline walls. He towered over his underlings, broad-chested, sporting scar-like ridges that marked him as a veteran of many conquests. The faint hum of captured Eldorian technology reverberated along the corridors. Standing at his side was an Eldorian scientist, Tarian Olis, once respected for his research in gene therapy. Now, he wore a forced expression of compliance. Morix demanded that Tarian's team yield every secret of biotech infusion so that the Gorax could strengthen their own warriors. Rumor had it some Eldorians, tempted by bribes or threatened with genocide, had betrayed their own world. The fortress bustled with Gorax soldiers, but also with these uneasy Eldorian traitors, hoping they could escape the conflict unscathed. On the far side of the fortress's detention area, behind shimmering energy bars, a cluster of Eldorian prisoners huddled. Among them were city officials, scientists, and even members of the caretaker class that preserved Eldoria's living architecture. They all knew that if the Gorax managed to replicate or weaponize Eldorian biotech, not only would Eldoria be at risk, but the entire region of space might face an unstoppable army. Morix, secure in his fortress, believed victory was only a matter of time. In orbit, the Paladin fought a pitched battle. A new wave of Gorax interceptors surged forward, testing the flank held by 2 UEDF frigates. The sleek Earth vessels danced among the asteroids, exchanging concentrated bursts of laser fire and missile salvos. One frigate's hull was breached, forcing it to retreat. The Gorax pressed in, hoping to gain momentum. Colonel Rook clenched his jaw. Alvarez, direct the Glendale and the Mariner to plug that gap. We can't let them encircle us. The Glendale's engines are overheating, sir, Alvarez replied, tapping at her console. But they can hold the line for a short time. Rook exhaled. Do it. We have to buy the infiltration team time. The infiltration team indeed needed that time. Aaron's soul guided them along a steep slope riddled with luminescent vines. Everything about Eldoria's ecology seemed alive with a gentle silver glow. This region, once a protected nature preserve, was now silent except for the occasional overhead screech of a Gorax scout craft. They timed their movements to avoid detection, slipping behind outcroppings of rock or thick stands of flora. They finally reached a large, half-hidden arch embedded in the cliffside. Eldorian script adorned the stone, and Aaron's soul quietly placed a hand on the surface. A soft glow acknowledged his genetic signature, allowing them inside. It was surprisingly cold once they proceeded down the sloping tunnel, the walls lit by patches of bioluminescent algae that left dancing patterns on the infiltration team's uniforms. Their plan was direct: sabotage the Gorax's city-wide power control, re-establish communication with the orbiting fleet, and free as many Eldorian prisoners as possible. Aaron's soul explained that the Gorax must have seized at least one of Eldoria's ancient shield generators, powerful devices left by Eldoria's ancestors to protect major settlements. If the Gorax had turned those shield generators into an offensive system, it could pose an even greater threat to the UDF fleet in orbit. As they navigated deeper, Mariko Ito called halt. Sensors show large power readings, about 3 kilometers below the central fortress. That must be it. If we get inside and set charges to disrupt their link, we cripple their control. Let's confirm the route. But as the group turned a corner, they discovered a fresh sign of intrusion. A chunk of the tunnel's wall had been blasted open. Bits of crystal lined the floor, and boot prints, Gorax or Eldorian traders, led deeper in. Aaron's soul pressed his lips together. They might know about these passages after all. In the distance, they heard footsteps and faint guttural voices. The infiltration team quickly shut off their lights, flattening themselves against the curved tunnel walls. Moments later, a small Gorax patrol appeared, accompanied by 2 Eldorians bearing forced or anxious expressions. A single slip would start a firefight. Mariko Ito motioned for her squad to stay hidden. The patrol trudged on, presumably checking for infiltration or additional Eldorians in hiding. When the enemy had passed, the group exhaled. Aaron Soul's expression was grim. "We have traitors among our people," he said softly. "They're likely feeding Gorax critical information about these tunnels." Mariko said nothing, only gave a short nod. She was aware that, in war, some would side with the invader for reasons of self-preservation or greed. The mission would be that much harder. Returning to stealth mode, they continued, each step more careful than the last. Meanwhile, high above, the orbital battle raged on. The Glendale shuddered under a direct impact from a Gorax cruiser's beam weapon. Metal plating peeled away, exposing vacuum to compartments that seconds prior had been manned by living, breathing humans. The Glendale's captain, with no alternative, transmitted an emergency call as the ship began to lose power. Colonel Rook, on the Paladin, felt every blow as though it landed on his own skin. "Sir," Alvarez said quietly, "the Glendale is out of commission. The Gorax have them pinned. They're requesting immediate backup." Rook clenched his fists at his sides. Dispatch the Mariner to cover them. Have the Glendale's crew evac to lifeboats, if necessary. I'll not lose more lives than we must. The tension soared. The Gorax smelled blood in the water, sending more fighters to harass the battered Glendale. But then the Paladins' flak turrets, newly recharged, unleashed a web of concentrated fire that ripped through the Gorax assault wave. Missiles streaked and found their marks, turning the boldest Gorax fighters into vapor. Realizing the UDF refused to be cowed, the Gorax fell back, regrouping near their blockade platforms. At that crucial moment, Rook pounded a fist on the comm panel. We have to get reinforcements. Start scanning for Ambassador Serani's vessel. She'll have Eldorian knowledge that might break these platforms' hold on orbit. The communications officer responded. Yes, sir. Scanning now. In the hush that settled across the Paladin's bridge, Rook gazed out the forward viewport. Great arcs of greenish plasma and contrails of missiles zipped in the distance. The entire system seemed locked in an ugly dance. The colonel took a moment to reflect on Earth's older wars, on how more primitive times had once threatened the species' own survival. But Earth had learned to unify, and now, unified, they stood ready to uphold their vow. Meanwhile, the infiltration team had reached the outskirts of the sub-fortress sector. The overhead corridors no longer looked naturally carved or simply built by Eldorian architects. The Gorax had dug deeper, hollowing out a base from which they controlled the planet's shield generator and power grid. Mariko Ito's handheld scanner flared, indicating robust security measures ahead. Looks like a set of scanning pylons, Ito whispered. If we trip them, they'll know we're here. Aaron Soul scrutinized the architecture, running his palm over a hexagonal embedded panel. We might bypass the pylons if I can access an older Eldorian override. He tapped at the panel with slender, agile fingers. I do recall certain master codes from my caretaker lineage. One of the human marines, Corporal West, raised an eyebrow. You could just open their back door with a few taps. Aaron's soul glanced over. If the traders haven't changed everything, yes. But hurry, they'll sense tampering soon. From behind came faint tremors, possibly Gorax artillery testing the surface or more starships impacting overhead. The entire planet seemed unsettled. Aaron's soul succeeded in halting the scan pulses, and the infiltration team moved forward. Passing through a wide corridor of carved crystal, they emerged into a broad, artificially lit chamber that opened downward in tiers. On the lowest tier loomed a massive, cylindrical structure humming with energy. Eldorian script glowed faintly on its surface. Above it, Gorax scaffolding clung to the device. Wiring and thick cables spliced in, evidently linking it to the fortress's new command center. It was painfully clear the Gorax had turned Eldoria's proud technology into a tool of suppression. Jackpot, Ito murmured. This must be the power nexus for the shield generator. If we sabotage that structure, we cut them off from controlling the city's defenses. Corporal West studied the vantage points, not to mention letting the rest of our forces land more troops if they want. Yet the entire tiered area was patrolled by squads of Gorax warriors and at least one massive war beast, a creature that resembled a cross between a reptile and a cybernetic tank. Eldorian traders milled about with data pads, evidently cross-checking power flow or analyzing the generator's unique biotech-laced design. Attacking head-on would be suicide. Aaron's soul inhaled softly. We can't blow it from here. If we do, the generator itself might detonate with catastrophic consequences. We have to bypass certain safety mechanisms, then disable the Gorax's control nodes. Lieutenant Ito nodded. We'll split into two sub-teams. One hits the control nodes near that scaffold. The other deals with the links at the center, freeing the generator from Gorax override. Then we rig an EMP to fry the entire system. They quietly divided. Aaron's soul, with a handful of Eldorian volunteers, slipped along the right flank. Ito took Corporal West and two more Marines to circle left, careful to stay in the shadows behind large support pillars. If any patrol caught sight of them, the entire infiltration would collapse. Meanwhile, Orbit was still contested. The battered Glendale hung in space, drifting but not destroyed, while the Paladin took aim at a newly arrived Gorax battleship that dwarfed many of the other vessels. Colonel Rook's face was a study in concentration as he prepared to test that battleship's defenses. Focus all railguns on their starboard flank. Have the flank corvettes release decoy drones, he commanded. The Paladin's advanced sensors locked on. We're forcing them to redistribute their power away from the blockade. That might give us a chance to regroup with the rest of the task force. Gorax beams slashed out, attempting to burn the corvettes, but the decoys sowed confusion. The battleship reeled under a punishing volley from the Paladin. Colonel Rook glimpsed the readouts, hull integrity dropping on the Gorax side. But the foe refused to yield, returning savage fire that rattled the Paladin's hull. Sparks erupted from a damaged console on the bridge. Alvarez coughed through the smoke, but kept calm. They're not going down quietly, sir. Rook grimaced. They never do. Helm, push the Paladin closer. We'll board them if we must. Keep them busy until the infiltration teams can disrupt the planetary shield. Then we can land heavier reinforcements. He prayed that Lieutenant Ito and Aronsol were making good progress. Below, in the tiered power chamber, progress was precarious. Aronsol's subteam crouched behind a large block of Eldorian stone. The Gorax presence was heavier than expected. At least a dozen heavily armed soldiers circled the central generator, with more guarding the scaffolding. The war beast prowled near a ramp, each step shuddering the floor. One Eldorian volunteer whispered, "We can't do this stealthily. There are too many." Aronsol's gaze flitted across to the scaffolding. Then we create a distraction. Let the second team slip in. He spotted what looked like a half-finished Gorax power conduit lying across the scaffolding. A cluster of unstable plasma batteries sat near it, presumably for hooking into the Eldorian generator. If they triggered a small explosion on that side, it might draw all eyes there without devastating the core. Aronsol gestured to one volunteer, handing over a compact sabotage device. Plant this near the plasma crates. Set it for a controlled detonation. We'll hide until it goes off, then dash for the control console. Moments later, the volunteer crawled away. Aronsol and the others sat in tense silence, hearing the guttural barking of Gorax commands and the hiss of the war beast's mechanical limbs. One slip, one footstep too loud, would end them all. But the volunteer was skilled. When they returned, they gave Aronsol a single nod. Seconds ticked by. Suddenly, a flash of light streaked across the scaffolding. The crates exploded in a contained but blinding burst, sending a Gorax soldier flying over a railing. An alarm klaxon wailed, and the war beast roared, stomping toward the explosion site. Perfect. Go! Aronsol led his subteam in a sprint across open ground. Some Gorax turned in surprise, but the swirling dust from the blast clouded visibility. Bursts of greenish sparks rained from above, adding confusion. Aronsol reached the central console, a panel of Eldorian text that had been overridden with Gorax script. He swiftly placed both hands on it, attempting an Eldorian caretaker override. Nearby, one Gorax soldier caught sight of them and raised a weapon. An Eldorian volunteer fired back first. A short firefight ensued, both sides exchanging sizzling plasma bolts across the power chamber. The war beast, alarmed, pivoted, but it was stuck in the debris from the explosion. Aronsol typed in the override codes, mind racing, sweat beading on his brow. Mariko Ito's subteam, meanwhile, used the chaos to approach the main generator. They ascended a flight of steps carved into the living crystal. Halfway up, an Eldorian trader blocked their path, holding an energy staff. His voice cracked. "You can't do this. The Gorax will slaughter us all if we resist." Corporal West responded with a quick, precise shot. The traitor fell to the ground, staff clattering. Ito's face was grim. There was no time for debate or negotiation. She and her Marines pressed on, reaching the tether of cables that connected the Gorax rig to the generator's ancient architecture. If they severed it properly, the Gorax would lose control, but it wouldn't blow Eldoria's capital sky high. "Cover me," Ito said, kneeling at the cables. She took out a small engineering kit. Wires and circuits had to be cut in a specific sequence. If we do this wrong, we might overload the generator. On the far side of the chamber, a Gorax soldier hurled a concussive grenade. Aaron Sol's sub-team dove for cover, though the shockwave still rang in their ears. He resumed tapping at the console. Alarms blared, and overhead lights flickered dangerously. He clenched his teeth. "They're locking me out with some custom encryption, possibly given to them by more Eldorian defectors." Mariko Ito heard him. "Aaron, you have to hurry." She was splicing wires, sweat trickling down her forehead as the hum of the generator intensified. The ground shook. Someone from the Gorax side must have triggered an emergency protocol that threatened a meltdown. Great pulses of energy erupted in waves from the center, swirling the dust into a bright, crackling haze. Even from orbit, some UEDF sensors picked up the spike in power. Lieutenant Ito grit her teeth and made the final cut. The cable sparked, unleashed a discharge, then went inert. At the same instant, Aaron Sol hacked through the last barrier on the console, isolating the Gorax data net from the Eldorian generator. In one grand, near-simultaneous shift, the alien glyphs on the generator's surface flickered back to Eldorian script. The planet's ancient shield device was no longer in Gorax control. Up in orbit, Colonel Rook's sensor officer exclaimed in excitement. "Sir, we're reading a significant power fluctuation from the planet's shield generator. The Gorax appear to be losing control of it." Rook's eyes lit up. "Then we can land ground reinforcements. Alvarez, deploy the second wave of transports. Secure that fortress on the ground. Let's drive them back." Alvarez nodded, relaying the order. As the battered Glendale drifted to the rear for emergency repairs, the rest of the UEDF fleet pressed the advantage. Freed from the threat of a planet-based superweapon, they fired more aggressively at the blockade. The Gorax's blockade stations, once menacing, now scrambled to target multiple incoming Earth vessels. Under the Paladins' devastating barrage, 2 stations collapsed in brilliant fireballs. The Gorax line fractured. The infiltration team was not out of danger yet. Having severed the Gorax link, they still needed to escape this power chamber before the war beast or the reinforcements arrived to corner them. Smoke swirled around them, the stench of scorched electronics filling the air. Mariko Ito signaled for retreat. "We did our job. Time to move out." Aaron Sol typed one last command to set the generator into a dormant mode, ensuring the Gorax couldn't just wrest back control in minutes. Then he joined the others, weaving through the rubble. They fought sporadic pockets of Gorax resistance, but many of the invaders were dazed by the abrupt sabotage. A series of twisting corridors led them away from the main chamber. Deep inside the fortress, Captain Morix recognized the abrupt shift in power. "Impossible," he roared, hurling a stolen Eldorian device across the war room. "Where are my traitors? Find them." Someone gave the humans a route to sabotage our control. One of his subordinates hissed, "Captain, the Earth ships are landing more ground troops. We have to fortify or retreat." Morix slammed a heavy fist onto a console. "I refuse to flee. Gorax do not run from lesser species. We crush them." But the intelligence reports flooding in showed the humans had shattered half the blockade. The capital city was galvanizing into a new wave of resistance. Civilians joined Eldorian remnants to liberate the captured neighborhoods, all spurred on by the knowledge that the ancient shield was free from Gorax control. Morix realized with growing fury that the Eldorians were rallying. They were not the fragile people he had expected. On the planet's surface, UEDF transports soared through the atmosphere, landing squads of Marines, medics, and support staff. Streams of Eldorian civilians rushed to greet them. Relief mingled with the panic of war. The silver-eyed people, once known for their gentle artistry, now took up salvaged weapons. They would not stand aside. Humans parted from the ships, offering them cover and supplies, forging an impromptu alliance on city streets littered with debris. Within hours, pockets of Gorax control began to crumble. The fortress's outer defenses fell under a joint assault from newly arrived Earth Marines and Eldorian militia. Mortars hammered the fortress walls. Aaron Sol and Lieutenant Ito took advantage of the confusion to slip inside once more, determined to rescue any Eldorian prisoners. They discovered entire wings sealed off by energy barriers, behind which Eldorian civilians and scientists huddled. Aaron Sol used caretaker overrides to unlock these cells. More and more people rushed out, some weeping in gratitude. Among them was Tarian Olis, the scientist coerced by Gorax. He apologized for being complicit under duress. "Forgive me. They threatened to exterminate entire families. I gave them partial biotech secrets. I never wanted this." Ito stared hard at him. "You can redeem yourself by reversing whatever you gave them. Help us now." Up above, the Paladin engaged in a final push. A monstrous Gorax battleship, dwarfed only by the Paladin in scale, unleashed a relentless stream of plasma arcs. The Paladin's shields flared, dangerously close to overload. Colonel Rook braced himself against the command table, ignoring sparks flying from overheated panels. "Redirect power to dorsal plating. Weapons, give me everything on that battleship. We finish this now." The entire ship trembled as its main rail cannons hummed with energy. Then came a punishing barrage that hammered into the Gorax hull, causing chain reactions in its reactor. A final, searing explosion consumed the Gorax vessel, leaving nothing but glowing wreckage floating in a silent debris field. With that, the last major threat in orbit was destroyed. The surviving Gorax cruisers scattered, looking to flee the system. One by one, the blockade platforms went dark as the Gorax abandoned them. On the ground, Morix realized he was out of time. Furious and unwilling to be taken prisoner, he rallied a handful of loyalists, hoping to retreat to a hidden transport that might yet escape the planet. The war had turned. Eldoria, with the help of the unstoppable human intervention, was now a theater of Gorax failure. By the fortress gates, dust parted to reveal Colonel Rook himself, who had descended with the next wave of reinforcements. He marched alongside a company of Earth Marines, helmet under his arm. When he saw a large group of Eldorians emerging from captivity, led by Lieutenant Ito and Aaron Sol, his face softened in relief. The vow was being upheld. Shots rang out somewhere deeper in the fortress as Morix's loyalists fought a desperate rearguard action. Rook quickly signaled his men. "Encircle them. Don't let that monster slip away." Then he hurried to Ito's position. "Status." She saluted quickly. "We disabled the shield generator, freed the captives. The fortress is on the verge of falling." Aaron Sol added, "Captain Morix is still inside, cornered. He might have stolen key genetic data. If we let him leave with that knowledge." Rook's expression went grim. "We finish this." Together, they pushed deeper into the fortress, weaving past rubble and twisted corridors. A large overhead crystal chandelier had fallen, scattering shards. They arrived at a courtyard turned makeshift landing pad, where a squat, black-hulled Gorax shuttle was powering its engines. Morix stood at the open hatch, flanked by armed troopers and an Eldorian trader wearing a twisted expression of regret. The moment he saw Colonel Rook, Morix bellowed, "You dare challenge me on my battlefield? Humans are insignificant scavengers. Once we regroup, we'll annihilate Eldoria and Earth next." Rook raised his rifle. "We're done with your threats. Surrender now." His voice was uncharacteristically harsh. "End it here." Morix sneered. His troopers fired first, launching a volley of green plasma that forced Rook and the others to duck behind broken archways. A firefight broke out, scorching the courtyard with bursts of energy. The Gorax shuttle's engines whined, preparing to lift off. It had partial damage from stray mortar hits, but might still break orbit. If Morix escaped, the Gorax could regroup outside the system and threaten them again. Aaron Sol risked a quick vantage shot, hitting one trooper in the shoulder. A human marine was grazed by another plasma bolt. Rook cursed under his breath, shifting to a new angle. He noticed that the left thruster array on the shuttle was flickering. One well-placed shot might disable that engine. He motioned for Mariko Ito to cover him, then sprang from cover, launching a tight burst of rifle fire. The greenish muzzle flash lit his grim features. Plasma hammered the shuttle's thruster. Sparks erupted, smoke geysering out in a hiss. The engine coughed, then died. Morix howled in rage. He tried to drag the traitor Eldorian aboard, presumably to glean more biotech secrets. But Aaron's soul sprinted across open ground, kicking up dust, and tackled the traitor away from the warlord's grip. Morix turned, swinging a massive gauntlet that slammed Aaron's soul to the ground with a heavy thud. Before Morix could deliver a killing blow, Rook's volley hammered into the Gorax commander's side, penetrating the overlapping armor. Morix collapsed to one knee. Clenching his teeth, the Gorax warlord tried one last time to raise his sidearm. But a final shot from Lieutenant Ito found its mark, and Morix fell back onto the shuttle's loading ramp, shoulders sagging in defeat. He glared up at the humans and Eldorians with hatred blazing in his eyes. Then, with a strangled gasp, the commander who had sought to conquer Eldoria lay motionless. A hush descended on the courtyard. The Gorax troopers who remained either fled or surrendered as UEDF Marines swarmed the area. The traitor Eldorian was taken into custody, trembling, stammering about how Morix had threatened to kill his family. Aaron's soul rose unsteadily, a bruise forming at his jaw. Rook offered a hand. "Good job, soldier," the colonel said, voice rough with relief. "We're finishing this fight right here." Far above, the last Gorax ships were in full retreat. The Paladin, victorious yet scarred by battle, floated in high orbit, overseeing cleanup operations. Ambassador Serrani's humanitarian vessel emerged from hiding and began assisting with medical support across the planet. Already, atmospheric craft soared to deliver food, water, and supplies to stricken Eldorian cities. It took several days for the smoke to clear, for the final pockets of resistance to be mopped up. The Gorax invasion forces scattered, their grand designs in tatters. Eldoria's capital, though battered and partially ruined, was now filled with the sights and sounds of determined reconstruction. Human medics worked alongside Eldorian healers to treat the wounded. Biotech specialists combined knowledge to craft vaccines, anti-radiation medication, even salvage the planet's living architecture from further decay. Colonel Rook, exhausted yet quietly proud, toured the triage centers with Aaron's soul at his side. They paused over battered dwellings, some still half-collapsed. Despite the tragedy, there was a deep sense of unity blossoming. Eldorians wore grateful smiles whenever they spotted the UEDF uniforms. Whispers of "they came, they really came for us" floated through the air. In a makeshift medical outpost set up in a once grand hall, Ambassador Serrani greeted them, eyes shining. "You did it, Colonel. You saved countless lives and ended Gorax tyranny here." He shook his head. "We just did what we had to do. Besides, I remember what your people did for Earth, how you saved us from that plague. Humans always return a favor." The ambassador's gaze dropped humbly. "That vow was more than we could have hoped for. But your entire fleet, you risked so much." Rook studied the lines of injured Eldorians on cots, the occasional Marine lying among them, a testament to the cost. "We owe our survival to your generosity once upon a time. If we'd hesitated, it would mean forgetting who we are." Days rolled on, weaving rescue and reconstruction into the city's narrative. Betrayers among the Eldorian ranks were put on trial, though some had complex motives. Tarian Olis, the scientist, pledged to undo any stolen secrets that might have escaped with fleeing Gorax ships. He worked alongside Earth engineers to secure Eldoria's biotech from future exploitation. Among the rubble near the fortress gate, Aaron's soul found an intricately carved box containing caretaker relics. Carefully, he lifted it out, dust sifting from the top. Within, he discovered an ancient Eldorian medallion, an heirloom from the earliest caretaker lines. He turned to Lieutenant Ito, pressing the medallion into her hand with quiet sincerity. She blinked, eyebrows raised. "What is this?" "A symbol of gratitude," Aaron's soul said in measured tones. "Of respect and unity between our peoples." My ancestors believed alliances must be sealed with tangible tokens, so they never forget each other. I want you to have it, to prove Eldoria will always remember Earth's help." She nodded solemnly, touched by the gesture, and carefully tucked the medallion away. Meanwhile, Colonel Rook and Ambassador Serani arranged a series of post-war briefings. Eldoria needed to formalize alliances with Earth. In a newly refurbished council chamber, once the seat of Eldorian governance, Rook and Serani stood beneath the planet's banner. Eldorian leaders who had survived the war approached a dais lined with a swirl of living, pulsing lights. "We propose a formal treaty," Serani explained to the small but influential assembly. "Eldoria will strengthen its ties with Earth. Technology, knowledge exchange, mutual defense. We cannot stand alone after this tragedy," Colonel Rook declared. "We will do whatever we can to help rebuild Eldoria. There's no debt left to repay, only the ongoing bond of friends. That's how humanity sees it." A hush fell across the hall, followed by appreciative applause from both Eldorian delegates and UEDF personnel. The sense of relief and pride was palpable. The war had been harsh. The scars would remain. But their unity was the unwavering message the galaxy needed to witness. Outside, the capital city's ruins still rose in jagged lines against the horizon, yet the atmosphere overflowed with hope. Civilians, freed from captivity, began cleaning streets, planting fresh silverleaf saplings, and rewiring broken biotech panels. Human engineers aided them, bridging the gap of knowledge with a willingness to learn. Overhead, small Eldorian drones dotted the sky, scanning for leftover Gorax devices to dismantle. The entire scene vibrated with collaboration. Mariko Ito and her Marines assisted in distributing rations and water to remote outskirts. Children stared wide-eyed at the humans, a mix of curiosity and gratitude. Some older Eldorians approached, shy at first, then bold enough to speak with the visitors, thanking them in the halting but heartfelt standard that Eldorians had adopted. The phrase, "You came for us," repeated like a refrain. After days of tireless labor, Colonel Rook finally allowed himself a moment of reflection. He stood on a promontory overlooking the city. The violet sky stretched overhead, spangled with stars. Down in the valley, pockets of warm light shone from newly powered structures, a sign of healing. Ambassador Serani joined him, silent for a time before she spoke. "Years ago, we found Earth ravaged by disease your people had no means to stop. Many Eldorians said it was not our fight, that traveling to help a distant world was risky. But we did it anyway, guided by the belief that all life is precious. Now, seeing your ships arrive above Eldoria, seeing your soldiers repel the Gorax, it mirrors that choice." Rook nodded. "Back then, Earth was in chaos. Many said we'd never recover, but you gave us a chance. So we promised we'd never forget. And we haven't." She smiled. "In your words, humans always return favor. We learned that the hard way, I suppose." He chuckled softly, the first trace of humor he'd shown in days. "The Gorax definitely learned it the hard way. And if any other threat tries to exploit Eldoria again, they'll find we stand together." They stared at the horizon where the first pink hints of dawn touched the swirling clouds. This planet, battered though it was, would endure. Rebuilding would be long and strenuous, but it was a shared endeavor now. The synergy of Earth's determination and Eldoria's biotech knowledge promised new horizons. Suddenly, a beep came from Rook's handheld communicator. Alvarez's voice crackled. "Colonel, we have reports of scattered Gorax pockets deeper in the southern continent. They're retreating, but we might want to send a mop-up unit to ensure they don't regroup." He sighed, shoulders rolling, then toggled the device. "Understood. Send me the coordinates. We'll get a squad out there." Serani turned to him. "It never ends, does it?" "It never does," Rook replied gently. "But that's all right. We'll see it through." In the weeks that followed, the UEDF established a small planetary garrison to stabilize Eldoria's security. Eldorian authorities insisted they remain, at least until the last of the Gorax threats and sabotage networks were purged. Meanwhile, relief cruisers from Earth and allied systems arrived, carrying supplies to rebuild the capital's infrastructure. Hollow-eyed refugees from outlying regions slowly made their way home, grateful to find their cities partially intact, or at least salvageable. Each day brought new evidence of Gorax atrocities, but also new examples of resilience among the Eldorians. Human marines and engineers worked side by side with them, forging friendships. Some shared jokes, tried Eldorian food, which glowed faintly, or taught each other basic phrases in Standard and Eldori. The war had left deep wounds, but out of that pain came a sense of shared destiny. Colonel Rook became almost a folk hero among many Eldorians, though he personally disliked attention. They spoke in reverent tones about the steadfast Earth officer who arrived in orbit just when all seemed lost. He tried to deflect such praise, pointing instead to the bravery of the infiltration teams and the courage of the Eldorian people themselves. Without them, Earth's vow to repay its debt might have been in vain. Eventually, the Paladin's urgent call back to Earth forced Rook to prepare his departure. Standing on a newly cleared landing field, he oversaw the final cargo shipments being loaded on his smaller Earth frigates. Mariko Ito and Aaron Sol accompanied him, discussing security transitions. Ambassador Sarani was there too, to extend thanks on behalf of Eldoria's surviving leadership. "I wish we could say your work here is done," Sarani said, "but we know your forces have obligations across the galaxy. The rebuilding will continue long after you've returned home." Rook nodded. "We'll leave a contingent. Admiral Grayson will command the garrison. As for me, I'll remain a call away. If you need reinforcements or any further assistance, just let us know." Sarani reached out, clasping Rook's hand in the traditional Eldorian gesture of trust. "You have done far more than we ever dared hope. Your vow holds true. Humans never forget a debt of gratitude." As the ramp of a transport shuttle lowered, Colonel Rook turned to Aaron Sol. "Take care of your people, officer. The day might come when we share a border with another threat. If it does, we'll stand together again." Aaron Sol inclined his head. "You can count on us, Colonel. Eldoria owes Earth more than words can say." With that, Colonel Rook and his staff boarded the shuttle, the hum of engines rising. The wind whipped over the landing field, sending dust swirling. Scores of Eldorian civilians gathered to watch, offering waves and calls of farewell. The last visual memory Rook had of Eldoria was a hopeful crowd standing among the ruins, forging a new future on the ashes of war. Minutes later, the Paladin's docking bays welcomed back its returning commander. On the bridge, Alvarez reported that all systems were at optimum and that the Council's official statement, late as ever, had arrived, lauding Earth's prompt assistance to Eldoria. Rook smirked at the political doublespeak. He gave a curt nod and told them to set a course for Earth. Before the final hyperspace jump, the Paladin hovered for a brief moment above Eldoria, as though paying a last tribute. The swirl of violet clouds and the silver city spires, battered though they were, remained a testament to resilience. Then, in a surge of dimensional flux, the UEDF flagship vanished into the shimmering corridor of FTL travel, heading back into the cosmic unknown. In the ensuing months, news bulletins across human and Eldorian territories recounted the swift, decisive liberation of Eldoria. The Gorax presence was all but dissolved. Some factions predicted that the Gorax might regroup in a distant sector, thirsting for revenge. But for the time being, the battered empire was in disarray, its leadership cut down in a single bold campaign. Rare among the swirling uncertainties of the galaxy was the knowledge that Eldoria was safe and that humans had upheld their promise. On Earth, parades welcomed the Paladin home, lauding Colonel Rook and his officers as heroes. They deflected the praise, repeating the refrain, "We simply repaid what was owed." Yet behind closed doors, the Earth government recognized the significance of the operation. Alliances with Eldoria ran deeper now, forging a star-spanning brotherhood that transcended species. The Gorax would not soon forget that humans, once known for squabbles and fragility, had risen to defend their friends with unwavering ferocity. A new rumor took hold among starfarers. Anger the Eldorians if you must, but don't let the humans catch you harming them. Because humans always return a favor. In some hidden corner of the cosmos, Gorak survivors cursed the day they had underestimated Earth. Pockets of smoldering resentment burned in the darkness. Meanwhile, on Eldoria, vibrant silverleaf forests were regrowing in the wake of destruction, living testaments to survival. Eldorian architecture, partly ruined, was lovingly repaired with the guidance of caretaker lines and new Earth engineering. Statues of unity were erected in city plazas, depicting an Eldorian figure and a human side by side. The medallion Aaron's soul had given to Lieutenant Ito became a revered relic, sometimes displayed at the capital's newly built Hall of Alliance. And so the story of Eldoria's liberation became more than just a triumphant battle narrative. It stood as a testament to the power of reciprocal bonds between species. In this vast galaxy where alliances were often fleeting and self-serving, one unbreakable promise had toppled an invasion. The moral was clear to anyone who learned of the Eldorians and the humans. Be careful whom you endanger. For humanity, once awakened by gratitude, would become an unyielding shield, and a vengeful sword, on behalf of those it considered friends. And still, the stars beckoned. Earth's fleets traveled onward, forging new connections, exploring uncharted realms. The Eldorians quietly rebuilt, shaping their homeworld into a place that could stand tall once more. Whether in the neon-lit corridors of Earth's orbital stations or the shimmering arches of Eldorian cities, one phrase passed from mouth to mouth, capturing the heart of all that had transpired. Humans always return a favor. Aliens learned the hard way.